Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest webinar and final installment in McGuire Woods Private Wealth Services virtual series, Facing Mental Health Challenges During a Pandemic. I'm Janet Van Kirk, and I'm joined here by Jim Leffler, and we're both from the Virginia Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program in Richmond, Virginia. Thanks so much for joining us, and I want to mention a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Note that once you have accessed the program, you will find several widgets on your screen. Feel free to explore them at any time during the presentation. I call your attention to the widget icon in particular. The resources widget includes any copy of the presentation. If you'd like, you are welcome to save to your desktop or print and follow along during the presentation. You can also find in the resources widget a link to McGuire Woods homepage, coronavirus impact, and insights page, and upcoming McGuire Woods programming. The URL widget houses a link to the McGuire Woods Private Wealth Services team practice page, and you should see a question and answer widget. This is the most important widget for us to go over today. Please use this feature to submit any questions that you have throughout the presentation. Any questions we do not cover will be addressed following the program. Jim and I will be available to answer any questions via email or through the question answers feature after the webinar. If we don't have time to get to those, we will reach out individually on your questions and answer them in any ways that we can. You will find a bios widget on your screen as well. You can expand this feature to get into additional information about each of us. Finally, please note that the full presentation will be recorded. We will be providing a copy of this recording together with the PowerPoint deck after the presentation is ended. We will distribute links to those via email in the next day or so. We will also note that CLE credit has been approved, and Juanita Price with McGuire Woods will be reaching out to you with those certificates via email. All right, and now on to our presentation. This will be occupational wellness while social distancing, something we have all become very used to since we started the pandemic back in March, or our social distancing requirements. We will go over introduction and goals, which we've done already, who we are, why should we care, where we are now, dealing with where we are now, and what we should do when we have some concerns that are being raised and the implications if we don't address those concerns. Again, we are Jim Leffler, the Clinical Director of the Virginia Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program. A little background, he is a licensed professional counselor and a therapist, and he has been with this program for about 15 years. And I am a social worker and a lawyer, but I don't practice anymore, so we get the JD at the end of my name. More information about us is available in your bios pick. This is the VILAP mission. Jim is going to go over a little bit, about 3 minutes about VILAP, and we'll go on from there.
Okay. Virginia Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program is a nonprofit organization that works with members of the legal profession in a non-disciplinary manner. This assistance is designed to prevent disciplinary problems and protect the client, as well as support the lawyer and the lawyer's family and strengthen the profession. So confidentiality, if you can remember 3 things about VILAP, I like to say that we don't charge for our services. All of our services are confidential, and we are not part of the Virginia State Bar. The services we provide are evaluations, assessments, referrals. We also provide support groups and education to people in the legal profession.
Now, we know that this is a presentation for CLE credit for lawyers, and we also looked at the participant registration and recognize that a lot of you folks are not in the legal profession. And so we will go over a little bit about what the risks are for members of the legal profession, and note that this would be applicable to other people with similar backgrounds and characteristics. So just pay attention to how you think that may apply to you, and then the rest of the presentation will go over skills applicable to everyone, everywhere, as we continue through this 7th month.
And if you're in the financial field, probably many of these things are exactly the same as it would be for a lawyer. There are some specific things about lawyers that because that's our specialty, that we want to just mention. There was a study done by the Hazelton Betty Ford Foundation along with the American Bar Association, basically that showed lawyers are have a much higher rate of substance abuse, much higher rate of mental health issues. Suicides is the 3rd leading cause of death, premature death among attorneys. 54% more likely than the general population. Lawyers in their first 10 years of practice, or young lawyers, generally have more problems with anxiety and depression, as well as the highest rates of both problems, drinking and depression.
And in Virginia, our Supreme Court and other in other states put together reports looking specifically at the occupational risks of the profession and the social characteristics that make us at a higher risk for having both addiction and mental health disorders. We have a 50% higher rate of addiction. It's 1 in 10 in the general population and 1 in 5 for lawyers. And then for mental health, it's about twice as likely. Also for depression and anxiety. The occupational risks were reviewed and are basically the same for anyone who has an office job that is high stress. And these are your physical risks, that we just sit around all day, your mental and emotional risks, that we have high demand and high pressure, your adaptation risks, in that we are always trying to do something better and don't know how to do that, and your self-actualization risks. And these are basically finding joy through external rewards or internal pleasure. And that is something that is constantly at battle when we deal with bonuses and hierarchy and all the things that we want to work up through and get rewards for in our profession. Then our traits of our professions are tight deadlines. We work a lot. We work too much. We have a lot of demands. Our clients want more than we can probably perform at and make miracles all of the time. There's a high level of conflict. We have a system that moves slowly, although it has moved much more quickly in the last 7 months. And then, at least for me, when I was practicing, being an attorney was the thing that was most important to me, and I wanted to make sure I did it perfectly, and therefore I over-identified with myself as an attorney versus a person. Living to work versus working to live was something that a distinction I had to make in my real life. Mm-hmm.
Another big problem is that frequently lawyers and other members of the legal profession aren't given the support and or recognition by members of the organization that they might be working in. You know, it's not usually they don't get pats on the back in the same way that would help and relieve a lot of the stress at the workplace.
And then additional traits of the individuals are that we are overachievers and competitive. We want to do everything right. We compartmentalize things, which helps us focus, but then leads things leaking into other parts of our lives of which we are not aware at the time. We are independent, but asking for help when working in a team is a way to get through most things. We are work focused, so we want to work from the time we wake up to the time we go to bed. And then what happens is getting the balance out in those 3 minutes before we fall asleep. We're risk adverse, which means trying something new, such as therapy or yoga or meditation or any of those things that will be recommended later on in this session, are something that we're not comfortable with because we haven't done it. And then again, talking about externally motivated, that we are driven for rewards that we may or may not get, which is difficult.
I'm guessing that that's not very much different from people in the financial field as well.
And then this was really interesting. This was from a study on legal personality. And this is where you look at the traits of lawyers versus the general public. The most important one in today's webinar is the resilience. That's the fourth one in, or the second one from the right. And that is that the general population has a higher rate of resilience than lawyers. And this resilience is one of the primary factors that help us to balance when trouble comes our way. Okay. So then we have all of these pre-existing conditions, if that's one way you want to look at it, on the risks that we have relating to both our practice, our personalities, our environments, and then life happens. Life happens in many different ways, so we are keeping a delicate balance, but our resilience is a little low compared to the general population, and then exacerbations of life occur. Any of the major life events can be that final drip that puts us into a place where we have okay mental health to where we have mental health that may be in need of external assistance. And note, the last one is everything in 2020. Where we are now. So we're here now, and it is September 30th, the last day of September in 2020. Have any of you been impacted by COVID-19 since March? Answer yes or no.
It might be the last day of the quarter too, so you might be a little stressed just because of that.
And I believe we're going to give you a minute to do that question. And here the results are coming through. And so of you, there's 60% who have, and there are 40% who haven't. Now, when we think about the question directly impacted by COVID-19, a lot of times we think, is someone I close to, a family member, a coworker, have they been diagnosed or had any difficulties or died related to COVID? But also the impacts of COVID-19 are the fact that we can't eat at restaurants without our servers wearing masks, or we have to work from home most of the time, or we don't get to go to happy hour on Friday, or
our vacation didn't go the same way we planned it to go.
I was supposed to go to California the third week of March. That didn't happen. I was supposed to go to Australia in May. That didn't happen either. And so when we think about the personal impact, we often think of just the direct causal effect of having disease and illness and a death, whereas there are lots of subtle impacts that will grain on us through COVID fatigue after all of this time not being able to have those outlets. And then in addition to COVID, we have all the other things that have occurred in 2020. I used to work, I'm not quite sure why one of the pictures didn't go down, but we have all of the major world events that are going on that have led to basically the ability for us to be under low-grade chronic stress for an extended period of time, which can impact the baseline for our mental health. And again, our profession already has a baseline that is different than most, and then the exacerbating circumstances can make it feel different. So the big question is, how are you really feeling between March and today? Has your anxiety increased at all since March? Note that there are a lot of studies that have been done, and most of these are survey studies done in snapshots in time, asking general population as well as lawyers a difference between their status in anxiety, depression, sleeping, all the different, what they call it a pandemic index, all those things and how they affect you. And there has been a dramatic increase for most of those people on just changes on how their baseline is feeling. And for this group, 0% is not at all, which means folks are aware that there is a change, which is a great thing. We have 36% who are slightly, 60% are considerably, and 4% are a great deal. And that is pretty consistent with the other survey findings, which are basically, I felt okay in March, and now I haven't been able to do all of those things. And while not all of them are COVID-related impacts, they are impacts that have affected me, and I feel different. And now I don't know what to do because all of those outlets I had before, I can't do because of the social distancing requirements. All right, and so this is what I just went over. These are all the different ways that we can feel differently because of what's going on. 90% of the people in a new nationwide study said that they feel worry and increased anxiety than they did back in, I think they were asking, the comparative month was January.
Some of the things that definitely happen because of this is there's some of the risk you may have is prolonged isolation is unnatural. It's even for introverts. Having a social network that you deal with more consistently does help with our mental health. You know, a lot of the things that we haven't been able to go to are parties and celebrations. Weddings have been postponed. Funerals have been postponed. Or not postponed, maybe even not happening. You know, the way we get and feel good about being a person frequently is because of our social interaction with others. The way we deal with pain, such as, you know, death and things like that, and happiness, such as bar mitzvahs and weddings, we haven't been able to do the way that's been normal to us. And a lot of the things that we normally go to haven't been there, and it causes stress and doesn't allow us to have the same outlets to feel good about ourselves and about where we are.
So here we are. Jim and I work in an office of 5 people, and in this office, our executive director was diagnosed with COVID and had to go into the hospital. He had a death in the family and had to have limited contact during the funeral. Then he lost another family member due to COVID that was contracted at the funeral. We have a woman here who was supposed to get married in March and just got married last week. and had to change those events. And then you have the rest of us just trying to figure out, this is my second day in the office since March. It feels a little weird.
And we're violating all the rules.
And we're violating all the rules.
Because of some issues I had with my computer.
So thank you for your patience as we muddle along. All right. So this is understanding the pandemic anxiety and fatigue. And basically when you feel this way, it's this really brain hormone cycle, and I'm going to let you talk about it. He's the therapist.
But basically what happens is that when things are not working the way you want them to be, you become more stressful. So what happens is when your attention, perception, and short-term memory and learning are all working as part of the hippocampus in the brain. And basically, when that's stimulated, you have the breast regulation of those kinds of things. So chronic stress increases chemicals in the brain. And what frequently happens is that that stress leads to less sleep or more sleep, poor nutrition, and emotional distress. And as that goes along, they keep feeding into each other, and it becomes a vicious cycle, so that the anxiety and then the stress of the brain feeds into each other, and you become less well functioning.
And then we have the cultural differences. Well, that's just what our body is going through the cycle of stress and response. Then we have the different ways that people respond to stress. And that is both culturally and gender specific, making sure that we are aware that just because someone looks okay from the outside doesn't mean that they are. And just because someone says that they are okay doesn't mean that they are okay. Throw one more factor on where we are today, and that's recovery. I don't know if folks listen to a lot of news stories, but being in recovery when the primary vehicle for maintaining your sobriety is through peer support and meetings and a cultural emphasis on connection. It's been very difficult for folks who are in recovery to feel connected to the recovery environments, and for people who recognize the need to join a recovery group to feel connected in making those connections.
While at the same time, many of the people that have been working in a recovery program have been able to deal with this in a better way than people in the general population, because they're used to having connections and maintaining those connections frequently. The other thing that just we kind of look at recovery, the sale of alcohol and the use of other substances has increased dramatically since COVID became, and isolation became a part of our society.
All right. So that's where we are now. That should have been very little new information for most of the participants. Where we are now, we are high-achieving individuals who may not have the best level of resilience, who are dealing with life that is different than the way it is now, we have been used to functioning in our lives. And then we have the exacerbating circumstances of all the other coping factors that may not be in existence. So now, how do we deal with where we are now? The first most important thing is recognizing that we are not in a natural state of existence. And we are not in the natural state of existence for this prolonged period of time with any plan when we entered this that it would exist for this long. And there is the continued uncertainty on when we will have relief from our circumstances. So we are dealing with where we are now, which is we are dealing with where we are today. And that is the only thing that we can really focus on right now, is making sure that how we are feeling today is the best that we can be feeling. We're going to do about a minute on some old school psychology 101, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is basically, you have to meet your basic needs in order to build upon them to feel better and to grow more.
And so part of the idea of being stressed out is that you don't take care of some of the really basic needs. We're not eating as well, we're not sleeping as well. We've been using food and other substances to deal with some of the stress at a higher level that I'm talking generally. And when that happens, you're not necessarily taking care of the other needs you need to be taken care of. The next set of needs is security, and a lot of people are really dealing with less money because of pay cuts and or loss of jobs. Employment becomes a big deal. You know, the whole idea of am I going to be safe because of my physical safety? Indeed. Becomes, you know, a big part of trying to take care of those needs becomes more and more difficult. And that leads to, you know, problems with other relationships, because if we're not taking care of our basic needs, we don't have the energy to build and improve on relationships that we have with other people. This leads to having to focus more on there, so you don't have enough or you don't have the energy to deal with taking care of ourselves and feeling better about ourselves because of the basic needs aren't being taken. And so all of these things become more and more difficult for us to be able to become self-actualized, and that's the goal of taking care of our needs under Maslow's hierarchy.
So I have to admit that I got really excited when we decided to add in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so I found a couple of different ways for us to look at them, particularly the way that we are looking at life these days. So on the left are just some additional information on what we look at for what Jim just explained. And on the right is actually how this looks different in our days. We have the functional part, which is basically getting our basic needs met. We have the emotional part. But if we look at all these different things that we're doing here, our lives had been fully focused around the different things that we did to find relief that aren't in existence anymore. I'm a huge fan of live music, and if I don't see someone play a banjo sometime soon, there could be a problem in the world. Now, just in my little world, so I have to come to terms with that and watch some sort of documentary on banjo playing. But this is one way to think how those basic needs look in the functions of our daily lives. And then this one is super duper interesting. And this is your emotional agility, looking at the impact of, we may not be able to go outside, but we can go inside. So taking this as an opportunity to look, okay, we don't have the ability to do outside what we want to do, but if we take this as an opportunity to mature in our interactions with the world throughout the pandemic, that is something that can be of benefit to us once we realize that we have to get acceptance of where we are, our basic needs met, and then move from growth from there. All right. Right, general well-being. These are, okay, so here you are. Our baseline anxiety was where it was back in January. And anxiety, when I say that, our mental health needs were back where they were in January. And then they have changed in the last 6 months, and then they are exacerbated by 2020, and every day there being something different that is devastating around the world. And the only thing that we can control through Maslow's hierarchy is to make sure that we have our general well-being taken care of, so that then we can grow in other ways to be more focused and more productive. So in looking at what we have control of in our biological and physical needs and safety and well-being is to make sure that we are doing everything we can do to stay well.
One of the things we do know is that people generally don't like to change. And when change is forced upon them, that causes additional stress. So some of the things you can do is to try to do the things you were doing pretty much the same way as you can. If you can't go to work, you should probably still try to find some kind of work routine at your house. What you should do is, you know, so that you can still have a workspace that's separate from the rest of the part of your life. You want to connect with others as much as you can. You want to find new and different ways to enjoy life. One of the things I've picked up is pickleball. I never played pickleball before, and pickleball is kind of a fun game to play. I played more tennis, and I also started doing more gardening than I had been doing before. You know, part of focusing on the positive is one of the things you can do to make yourself feel better. Instead of looking at what you can't do, you should start looking at what you can do. So what you don't want to do is read too much or watch news too much. You don't want to get off of your routine. You don't want to spend too much time on social media, you know, looking at conspiracy theories and those kinds of things. You don't want to use more drugs, food, or alcohol than you had previously. And you don't want to get sucked into the negative emotions of other people, which there are a lot going on right now. You do want to stay connected with your faith group and civic groups as much as you can, as those are a good way to deal with feeling uncomfortable. So working from home, as I said, you want to keep balanced. You want to do the things that you used to do and not allow yourself to be either working too much or working too little. You want to be flexible because you have to realize things aren't going to happen the same way they used to be happening. You have to give, it's best to give that same kind of leeway with other people that you're interacting with. Make sure that you take breaks and spend some quiet time to think about what's going on with you. Get out of the house and get some fresh air. Maintain relationships with other people through either social distancing safely or maintaining relationships with Zoom meetings and things like that. Make sure that you're staying in touch with the people that you work with, because it's really important. A lot of the satisfaction we get from work is with people that we're working with, and if we don't know what's going on with other people, some of the connection that we have at work may be impacted negatively. Make lists of tasks that you want to complete, and when you accomplish them, check them off. At the end of the workday, make sure that you close your office the same way you do when you go home from work. So you don't want to be working all the time. You don't want to have unrealistic expectations of yourself or of others. You don't want to expect the same outcomes that you had previously, and try to not focus on what you can't control.
Now, for folks attending this, maybe like, well, that's common sense. I know I'm supposed to do all that. Then it's changing it into practice. That is the hardest thing. As we know, it takes about 3 weeks to make something that is a experiment into a habit, and habits are hard to form when we're used to doing what we are used to doing, particularly when we started doing this thinking it was temporary and now recognizing that it will not be as temporary as we had hoped. So it is really important to focus on the little things. I just got off the phone with the dean of one of Virginia's law schools, and we were talking about her work-life balance. We were originally talking about how VILAP in the law school could engage in supporting the students, and I recognized the need in this administrator that she wasn't meeting any of her needs. And so we actually do a weekly check-in where it is baby steps for her to add into her life something that is one of these do's and to remove some of the don'ts. She used to have her workplace in her kitchen so that every time she went anywhere, she felt like work was looking at her. In addition, she was also 5 feet from the snacks, which was not a very great thing for her to do. She's now blocked off an hour of her day. It doesn't necessarily mean that she will do something personal like journaling or walking outside, but an hour of her day where she isn't in meetings so that she can get the things met, the housekeeping measures that we can't always meet through that time. We also scheduled in our ongoing meetings. A lot of us were going into work and having coffee talks. If you're a Saturday Night Live fan from way back when, that makes more sense to some of you. But also the water cooler conversations, checking in with someone next door, venting. All of that isn't happening organically. So we have to add in these little things where it's, I will talk to this person on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and it feels really scripted, and I hate it. And I'm not a fan of the phone, and I'm not a fan of Zoom, and I'm definitely not a fan of the blank screen for presentations. But all of this is important for us to make sure that we have the whole package in our lives, making little itty bitty changes. This may sound goofy, but I bought one of the Susan Summers buy things. And like when I get bored at work, when I'm working at my desk, I just do 20 of those. And I'm like, oh, okay, I have a little bit of energy because I'm not getting the energy that I would have previously gotten from interacting with my coworkers and having the usual exchanges that I have every day. Now, one thing that all the world has told us is that one thing that is readily accessible, we may not have been able to get toilet paper back in March and April, but we were very able to get booze. Go ahead.
26% of women and 36% of men say that they've been drinking at home during working hours. Alcohol does not work well with your brain. It impacts the front part of your brain initially, which impacts thinking skills. It disturbs sleep. You don't process food as well, so your nutrition gets impacted. Alcohol affects every part of your body and every major system of your body, and it does not do it in a good way. Alcohol is a great thing to reduce anxiety for a short period of time, but it increases it as you process it through your body. It's difficult to be honest with other people if you have concerns about whether they're drinking too much, but it's important to do that because if someone does have a problem with addiction, the disease is progressive. And if you're having a problem talking to somebody else about it, talking with other people that may know that person may help you form some kind of a coalition to do it in a more group way, which may make it easier for you to do. It's really important not to look at drinking. There have been a lot of new social clubs that have been started online, Zoom drinking games, Zoom drinking meetings, and those kinds of things, because people do use alcohol as a way to socialize. It's important to really look at the way you're using any drug, and alcohol is certainly a drug, in order to make sure you're doing it in a safe manner.
And with this, just like with mental health, everyone has something going on, whether it's healthy mental health or unhealthy mental health. Everyone has a relationship with alcohol, whether it's complete abstinence or they fall into that 1 in 10 in the general population or 1 in 5 for lawyers, where they have a problem relationship with alcohol. I am a person in recovery, and I feel like I am very lucky to have entered into recovery prior to the pandemic, because having all of this time on my hand, most of it alone, without accountability, in the same way as it is seeing someone every day, I can look really good from here up. You guys don't know whether I'm wearing shorts or jog pants or whatever, but presenting it, people present differently. He look, I'm wearing pants, but people present differently on the screen than they do. When I do one of my first assessments, I always meet with the person in person so that I can get a vibe for how that person is engaging, and that is a really human nature element that we are missing on a day-to-day basis. And so just be honest with yourself, explore your relationship. Most people don't have a problem, but if there is a change, and the change is just to make yourself feel different versus the conviviality of friends or the social aspects that it is used as a temporary engaging process versus a coping skill, is something very important to look at. The rates are really high. We're looking at the emergency room rates. There are a higher rate of individuals going with overdoses and with alcohol detox requirements than there were prior to the pandemic starting in March. So that was a lot. And this is basically, let's put this into 5 bullet points.
One of the most important things really to look at is adjusting your expectations. Things are not going to be the same as they've always been and the way you always expected them to be. Look at, breaking down life in smaller increments. They say how do you eat an elephant 1 bite at a time? That's the same kind of thing you should be starting to look at yourself. Keep one small promise for yourself every day. Look at one relationship that you can really improve by spending some investment in, and that you can really have honest talk with that person. Recognize when you're getting negative and adapting your individual coping skills to alleviate that negative emotion. One of the things that I found really helpful in my life is to do a gratitude list every day. If I put down 3 or 4 things I'm grateful every day, it's much easier to be positive for the rest of the day. The other thing is when you're not doing well, hopefully you've developed that one relationship that you can reach out for help for yourself, or if you're recognizing that you're having one of your friends is having issues, that you can reach out to them, and perhaps, like I said, build a coalition of other people that may be able to help that person as well.
We're not saying that this is easy, because it's not, because we don't like change, and there's some risk aversion and a resistance to change as our basic personality traits. But step by step, it will make us feel a little better on our baseline. And speaking of how to feel better on our baseline, this is Justice Mims of the Virginia Supreme Court is a big fan of talking about the 6 dimensions of lawyer well-being. And these are the 6 dimensions of life well-being, but in the ABA task force and the Virginia report looked at where to find the most appropriate balance across each dimensions, and when it is either, again, on a spectrum, it could be a healthy balance or an unhealthy balance, but when you are in an area of safety in all of them that then you have a greater likelihood of having a positive outlook?
This belief system of balancing your life is not anything new. Sharon Wakechetter did some work back in the 70s about the whole person concept. And basically what we're talking about here is being balanced in a lot of different areas so that you can, so you don't become overly involved with one and ignoring other issues or other parts of your life. When you're happy in one part of your life, you may have more resilience to work on another part of your life that isn't really good. So the six things that MIMS talks about as emotional, occupational, intellectual, spiritual, physical, and social issues, which were pretty much the same things that Wakechetter talked about 50 years ago.
So looking at each of those, they basically act as a resilience counterbalance. So when that last drop is thrown into the tub, relying on something from one of the other spheres helps to build up resistance to that one drop being where it takes your balance off kilter. So finding balance in each of those is difficult, but finding some balance on how you engage with them and how you are aware with them and what you do to support them is important. And then I liked this. This is the profile of a happy lawyer. So profile of a happy lawyer. So we went through all of those things that put us at risk, and we went through all of those personality traits and professional traits and occupational traits that put us at risk. But if we know and appreciate ourselves, we seek to improve more than to accumulate. We feel close to others. We seek help both through our peers and in our community. We find meaning and enjoyment in our work. We give and receive support at work, and we have a growth mindset. When we put that all together, it actually has shown through the study referenced at the footnote that the perception or response to positive emotions is greater than to those that we would put into, I don't like the words positive and negative, but areas of concern. And so a lot of that is finding within yourself appreciation and growth and benefit towards what we do, and also sharing that with others, asking for help and receiving help and giving help, and trying to be a channel of information and community that may or may not exist if we are only focusing on accumulating and if we're only focusing on achieving. It is, again, it was a law school class that I presented in where they did you should not live to work, you should work to live, but it is finding a way that your work contributes to your life and not is the sole component of advancing it. All right, so what should we do? This sounds a lot like that laundry list of things that we went over before, but those are the things that we can put together on the do's and don'ts. What happens if someone has gone from being okay to not being okay?
So, one of the things that's really important, I think, even before we start talking about this, is having an appreciation of people around you that are also having a lot of stress and anxiety and problems because of the crazy times we're living in. But in order to recognize somebody else having a problem, sometimes it's really important to also be looking at ourselves. So if you can look at different ways that you might be signaling to yourself and others that you might be experiencing distress, is that you're not working as well as you used to work. You're not getting things done the way you used to be getting things done. You're not taking care of yourself as far. I mean, I know most people gained weight during the pandemic. I think there's the pandemic 20 pounds. I think people are talking about a lot. But if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not showering the way you used to shower, if you're not wearing clean clothes, if you're not doing, if you're not doing things that you need to do in order to be healthy as a human being, brushing your teeth, shaving, those kinds of things. If you're having problems scheduling things, it's really important that you look at why you're having problems. Is it avoidance, or is it just because, the other people aren't available? Sometimes, we just avoid things. And most times when we're avoiding things, it's because it's going to be difficult to do those things. And frequently, if we do the things that we're avoiding, we feel a lot better and lessens the anxiety instead of increases it. if you're having big mood changes, if you're crying at times when you used to not cry, if you're, have mood swings from feeling really great to being depressed, if you're really defensive and other people are talking about how you're having a quick temper, or if you're having relationships in problems because of those kinds of things, it's important to recognize that if you're having those problems, that it may be because, you're not taking care of yourself the way you need to be. If you're not able to concentrate the way you used to be able to concentrate, if you're not able to read the way you used to be able to read, and you can't stay on topic, those are all things to recognize as perhaps related to what's going on in your life and how stressed out you are.
And at the beginning, we asked how many people feel a higher level of anxiety today than they did back in the winter, and it was more than half. And so feeling anxiety and knowing we're feeling anxiety, and then it impacting how we are going through our days are two different things. And if you would spend a sec just on the difference between getting into a clinical area.
I'm sorry?
Going from anxiety as a coping skill, fight, or freeze, into anxiety as something that may need attention.
Now, again, all of us are going to experience anxiety. I'm also going to experience depression at times. It's normal to be sad if, your pet dies. It's normal to be stressed out when you don't feel like you're able to accomplish what you need to be accomplishing. Those things are normal, and usually what goes on with those kinds of things is that you learn to deal with them. Most of us have had difficult things in our lives that we've had to go through, and we've gone through them in a normal kind of way of adapting. When things get to the point where you're not able to get through the things that are normal, and it's causing more and more difficult as far as relationships or work, that's when you need to figure out what you need to do in order to get through those things. If sometimes it may be just a phone call. I got a call the other day from a judge who called and said, I'm not sure if I have a problem yet, but I feel like I'm not getting done what I used to be able to get done. I'm not sure if I need anything other than if I need counseling or not. And what I did was, hook him up with another judge who has been on a similar bench as he's on, and they were able to talk through what was going on with him. But the judge really wasn't having problems that were significant enough that he needed any kind of professional intervention. But what he needed to do was to be talking to peers about what's going on with him, and that's not a normal thing for judges to necessarily do. And it's not a thing that most of us are willing to do either, is to talk about questions we have or fears or anxiety that we may have going on in our lives, to open ourselves up to other people that way. Frequently, people who think that they need professional intervention just need to increase their social engagements and become more comfortable talking with other people about what's going on with them. But if they're not able to do that, professional help may be needed.
And for me, I am not a person who likes to talk about how I'm really feeling. The knowing look from the guy next to me. But I have had to make a concerted effort to reach out to people because of the lack of the water cooler conversations. And so in addition to observing what's going on with you, just observe what's going on with your coworkers and your peers and your friends and your family. Early intervention and preventative efforts are the best answer to anything. Stopping a problem before it happens, helping a problem before there's misconduct, making sure there isn't an ethical violation, knowing the symptoms and being like, hey, what's going on? Did you run every morning this week and forget to shower? That may not be the way you ask it, but it is one of those things that you look at and wonder what's going on. And then if the problem is too big for the one-on-one conversation with your peers, involve friends, involve family, but also most places, including McGuire Woods, you have your employee assistance program. For lawyers, has their lawyers assistance program, and then there are numerous other resources out there for seeking assistance when maybe what we have in our toolbox isn't sufficient.
You can always call us if you have a question about what's going on with you or with somebody else. Frequently, probably 30% of our calls are handled just by conversations with those people. It may not take a single conversation, but it may take a single conversation. It may take 7 or 8 conversations over the phone over, 2 or 3 months. Lots of times people just need to understand that what they're going through is all right. Normal feelings, lawyers in general are not real comfortable experiencing and understanding. So it's perfectly okay to contact VILAP, and we will be more than happy to talk about what's going on with you or with somebody else. And if you need more than that, we're happy to help you figure out what you may need or what the other person may need, and help you figure out a way to talk to that person and to get them the help that they might need.
And I laugh when Jim said, well, emotions aren't things that lawyers really feel or understand, except for the fact that I kind of was a little autotron before I figured out that my emotions are important for me to feel and to understand. I can't control them, but they are important for me to pay attention to, and I would always just compartmentalize them and put them away. And now is not the time for that. This was an interesting questionnaire that we found online that basically it's very scripted and it's very remedial, but it's also asking, and there was that back, I think it was in June, there was the how are you really feeling push. Not just like, I'm feeling fine today, but when you're talking with someone, don't just say, how are you doing today? Be like, now what's really going on with you? And I've used that with every check-in that I've had, which is, how are you doing? All right, so tell me how you are really doing. And the second question generally always gets a different response than the first. And so checking in on how people are, where they are, what they're doing. And these questions look at basically those 6 dimensions of wellness and say, what's going on? Can we do this? There is actually a little practice manual or a manual that comes with these questions. And basically it says, if you ask these things and you wait for the answer, then it will be relief for both of you folks. Just making sure that you are focused right. It looks at your physical, mental, emotional, cognitive, as well as also, are you grateful today? So adding in a spiritual and grounding component to it all. So there's something to think about. How are you actually feeling today? Something brought 150 plus people to this webinar, in that it is a weird world that we're living in. This is the second wave of the pandemic, which is the mental health pandemic. And we need to do what we can to stay strong and to support each other throughout all of this. When the pandemic started, we had the 7 p.m. do your whistles, honk your car horns for all of the first responders and primary workers in the medical and helping fields. And that a lot of that has gone away. So the enthusiasm for supporting each other, while externally has waned, it's still really important to keep that internally and to do the little things that we can do to check in and to be supportive and to be there for each other.
I mean, it's become normal for 750 to 1,000 people to die every day from this disease. And if you think about in March, if we were hearing that, it would have been completely devastating to our thinking on a day-to-day basis. But as the world changes, we need to figure out how those changes impact us in ways that we don't even recognize. And that's the idea of checking in every day and being looking at ourselves, because we're not comfortable. Well, let me put it, I've never been really comfortable at looking what I need to be doing in order to be as healthy as I need to be. And it's a habit, just like any other habit, that we need to work on, or I need to work on a daily basis in order to make sure that I stay healthy.
Right. So then, all right, so we look at that, we find out how we're really doing. And if there is an area for concern, just like we talked about a couple of slides ago, it's not a big deal. Lots of people are having concerns. 60% of us participating in this webinar have something that doesn't feel the same as it did before. Just don't ignore it. Talk to someone, listen to someone, engage with someone, feel connected. Avoid saying, oh, don't worry about that, pull up your bootstraps and move on. Avoid saying, it's okay, you can wallow in whatever's going on for extended periods of time. And wallow is a very packed word, and it's a word that I was raised with. And it isn't just wallowing, it's accepting where you are and then taking that as an opportunity for growth versus something that can hold us back.
And sometimes it's something as little as giving yourself an amount of time every day to deal with that. Wallowing is stuck in my head now, but for that bad feeling, rather than allowing yourself to do it for days and days and days at a time. What I frequently do with people that I've been working with who have some serious issues that I would be sad about too, is I try to have them, compartmentalize that into 1 hour a day or 30-minute times a day. So, it's something that they should be sad about, but if they're able to do that, and frequently they're able to get a lot more done than they were able to get prior to compartmentalizing it and actually taking an action and trying to change that behavior or thinking.
And then if there is reason for concern, if the symptoms exist or persist for an extended period of time, usually that benchmark is 2 weeks, reaching out to your employee assistance program, to us or your state's lawyers assistance program, reaching out to a mental health professional, talking to someone who knows something, just doing something a little bit extra to make sure that you are staying in the balance where it is productive and healthy.
Take the risk to ask somebody, that you trust. That's really important. Most of us aren't willing to do that because it's like a dog laying down, letting their neck be exposed. It's a big change and a big scary thing for most of us to let people know we're not doing well.
And since you brought up dogs, my dog's here in the office today, so make sure you love your puppies. If I didn't have to walk him, I probably would be a lot less sane today. All right, so this is the focusing on today, focusing on our actions. We're not going to go through all of this given the time, but just remember that what you can do is recognize where you are and then do what you can based on what you can do. A lot of what I would like to do is control what I can't control. If I could make anything different, I would, but I know I can't because I can't control things outside of my control. So I encourage you folks to look at that. Go ahead.
And at the same time, don't deny what you can control. There's some old studies that were done on internal versus external locus of control. And if you start looking at things that you can accomplish rather than surrendering to the idea that you can't do anything about making yourself feel better, you're not going to feel better. So recognize the little things you can do. And again, what we're talking about is how to eat an elephant. You do it a little bit at a time. One bite at a time can make you feel better. So if you start doing a little bit every day to make yourself feel better, in the long run, you are going to feel better.
And then most importantly, back in the little print are all those things we went over that you should try to do a little bit every day. But most importantly, be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself, be kind to your friends, be kind to your coworkers, but also just self-care and self-empathy, self-sympathy, self-compassion. Those are the things it is okay to feel crummy. As long as we recognize that we're feeling crummy and do what we can and take the actions that are within our control to get out of that situation. Now note, if you are struggling from a clinical condition, that is not something that you can do on your own. There may be a need for therapy and or medication, but making sure that you are kind to yourself, knowing that it is okay. I actually yesterday ordered one of those little mood lighting things. I was like, I'm going to do what I can to stay healthy when it starts getting dark outside and I can't talk with other people and do other things. So little things that we can do to change our daily lives are important for us to stay where we can be in the most healthy place under the circumstances over which we do not have control.
And I just want to push again, starting a gratitude list, I think is a really important and really easy way for people to start feeling better about their lives. It's not hard to do. You can start with just 2 or 3 things. But each day, if you're feeling grateful, you generally are not feeling angry or frustrated with other things. And the other thing is give other people a break as much as you can. They're going through the same stress as you are. And if you can be passionate with other people, it becomes easier to be passionate for ourselves.
And remember the different coping skills that different people have, that what you may perceive may not be what's going on with them, and that everyone addresses things in different ways, but to be respectful of their place and their presence. I can say I am grateful that my puppy was able to come into work with me today because he can't be alone, and this would have been hard doing this without Jim. I'm grateful that his audio didn't work because we got to do this together, and I think the back and forth made it a more meaningful adventure, at least for me, hopefully for the folks who participated.
I'm grateful her dog didn't nip at me, which she has done before. So life is good.
Little things on our gratitude list. We're not going to go over this slide because we have 2 minutes left, but this is just something to look at on practice tips for keeping your anxiety under control. Anxiety is not the only emotion that is exacerbated during this year, but it is one of those things just to pay attention and to stick with what we know. Don't make assumptions. Don't make conclusions that may or may not exist, but just go through where we are and enjoy what we can. I took my puppy for a walk on the Capitol grounds here in Richmond beforehand, and it was just amazing just to enjoy the green that was there in the lawn that I wouldn't have noticed had I not put myself in a place to appreciate where I was right then.
And you know, one of the really cool things I think that's happened with this pandemic is that there are very few dogs in shelters right now because people have, and cats, and people have really recognized the benefit of having a pet. I can tell you, you know, I spend a lot of time every day petting my dog, and I know that she appreciates it and I appreciate it, so it's a good thing.
Of course, those of you guys who are, you know, working 15 hours a day, let's start with working 14 hours a day and then work our way to our pandemic puppies. And why should we care? For the lawyers who are here, paying attention to our mental health is important. One, because it helps us to be better professionals. A happy lawyer is a productive lawyer, but also a competent lawyer is one who doesn't get into trouble.
You know, it's also, if you can figure out a way to start enjoying your work or continuing to enjoy your work, it makes you feel much better as a person, and it'll lead to you being less likely to become burned out and frustrated with the profession.
Okay, and that brings us to the closing of our hour. Thank you all so much for joining us. Just a reminder that if you want any questions to be answered, I don't know if we had any, I don't think we did, but feel free to submit them and we will answer them. Our information is on the VILAP website, but also our hosts have made that readily available. For CLE credit, CLE has been approved, and Juanita Price with McGuire Woods will be reaching out with those certificates. Materials are available. This has been recorded, and that will be sent out to you after the webinar has concluded. And I believe that is it for the technical information that we need to cover today, and that is it for our presentation, unless there are any questions or any other information that should be provided.
Thank you very much for not falling asleep if you didn't.
And remember, today, 10 minutes, doing something that is different than you did yesterday that will put you into a better headspace. Thank you.
Start that gratitude list.